little bit, I don't know, my complexion a little bit darker, and she just felt she was so black, and that she was treated poorly by her family because of this. And this colorism, this is what black people suffer from. Black people go one way, well, we'll write a law against that. Black people go another way, we'll write a law against that. That's why I say wrote and written.
Just giving a little bit of background, you said that God was your hero. So what does that mean to you?
The embrace or love.
Well, hello, good people. Welcome back to another episode of Sit Down with the Author. I am your host, Miss Y, and we are sitting down once again with Sojourner Hebrew to glean at her feet. We are still studying the Emancipated Gospel, looking now at chapter 12. Part 3, the Plight of the Ekklesia. I was actually watching a YouTube video, a little short of a guy going around a college campus asking African people their names. What's your English name? What's your African name? And what does it mean? And it was ironic that one of the girls was Ethiopian and her name was Ekklesia. I've never heard that before. So that was like, wow, that is so cool. So how is your morning, week? And I'm going to ask again, you're going because we are almost done.
We're almost done with what? I can't hear you.
We're almost done with the year, Mom.
Oh, the year. I missed it. Well, our week has been interesting. Another library has been lost. My father-in-law, he died, Jaga Karanja. He was a very, very great man. Mau Mau warrior, oath giver, who was a freedom fighter in Kenya, politician, sort of freedom fighter. And he gave his life. And after, no, I don't mean he gave his life. He gave his being, living life. And after the war against the British was won and Kenyans got independence, he left from being a construction worker after he heard the gospel, and he preached the gospel for the rest of his life. He's being laid down to rest at 100 years old, and people from where he's from have many, many stories about how Jaga Karanja meant so much to them and how he changed their life, turned them from where they were going to the direction of life and eternal life. So that's where we are this week, remembering this giant.
Well said. Not only was he a giant, like I told my dad, a legend has left us, but he was definitely a giant presence. Very tall in stature and just, to me, really larger than life. So he will definitely be missed. And it is an honor and a pleasure to say that, you know, we are part of that family, and 100 years is a life really well served.
Yeah.
Just we dedicate this episode as a tribute to him.
The patriarch, and tunakushukuru sana kwa kazi aliyoifanya.
All right, so getting into chapter 12, we were discussing unity and strife at the introduction of chapter 12. And now we are dealing with looking at strife in schisms of the church and persecution of people in the church. And I sent you a video earlier this week. I came across a video that kind of went along these lines. It's talking about Islam and Islam extremists and what their ideologies still are, and how there's still this thing about the word infidels. I know you spoke about this earlier, that the Western world are seen as infidels if you are not a believer in Allah. And if you do not convert, and actually how the video was talking about, they really don't want anyone, they don't want you to convert, they want to annihilate you. And so just looking at that video and making the connection of what we have been talking about, yes, this is centuries ago, but still a lot of people's ideologies have not changed. We're going to look at the legend of Saint Maurice. And I just want to, again, do this a little bit differently. It's just hard to put this into points. It's very dense. It's a lot of material. And so I was reading about the legend of Saint Maurice, and we say it's a legend because some say it didn't happen at all, but there's a statue of him, and there are stories about him. I'm not going to read a passage, but I want to bring something out where it talks about how he was born in Thebes, and he's a commander of a legion of a Roman army. Everybody in his army was Christian. And then he was called to fight against a tribe of Christian peasants. That, as we were talking about Vince Bantu, and he was talking about how Christians began to fight against each other just because of some theology differences, that kind of, it reminded me of that. But it was interesting how you have this emperor who wanted this army to fight against Christian peasants. And for what? And you think about it was more of like a takeover because they're peasants, right? So if you could speak to the legend of Saint Maurice, kind of give an idea for us what his life was about, and then talk about his martyrdom.
Okay. I want to sort of pull together some things that you put out there on the table about this video about the Muslims and how they not only are not want people to convert to Islam, but they just want to annihilate non-Muslim people or people who don't believe the way they believe. And this is not, I know you said this is not Muslims, these are Muslim extremists, because I'm sure that people who are Muslims and have been raised in Islam and their families are loving God, they are not extremists. As a matter of fact, some of them have suffered from extremist ideology. But it's this idea of my way or the highway, or we are the orthodox. This is the way Christianity is supposed to go, or this is how the belief in one God is supposed to go. We have been given license to exterminate or to subjugate or make people be who God has told us they're supposed to be. That's the idea that we're talking about with Saint Maurice. That's the idea that we're talking about with martyrs. Martyr is a witness. Marturia is a Greek word which means a witness. The witness is to Jesus Christ. Christ being the Lord. Christ being the true King of the universe. And we are his people. The Bible says in the book of Revelation that we are made kings and priests unto Jesus. So there is this government against which the kings of the earth, or the king of the underworld, Satan, who fights against God, they participate. And so all of this bloodshed, all of this propaganda which says this is the right way and this is the wrong way, and if you don't get it the right way, you're going to die, comes from this war that the evil one has against Christ and his people. All wars come from this war. So when we look at Saint Maurice, the Legion, the Theban Legion, I was talking to a friend about this, and he said, he's a Christian, he said, well, they were mercenaries, they were killing, they should, they got what they had coming for them. Because mercenaries are people who fight. They don't have any loyalty to any government. They are hired killers. They're hired people who are warriors, and that's who the Theban Legion were. These were Egyptians. They were Thebans. They were Christians. So first of all, we got to wrap our mind around that. Many of us who are listening to this program in the West believe that Christianity started in the West. No, we're looking at 286 AD. This is 286 after Jesus died, and we are looking at Thebans, which are Egyptians who are Christians. We are looking at people who have a backbone. I don't understand what it was to be a mercenary in those days. They were mercenaries. They were fighting for Romans. They were fighting. The Romans hired people out. They hired Africans to fight, and they hired the Theban Legion. But there came a time when Maurice says, I'm going no further. I am not going to kill people because they're Christians. Apparently, they were not mercenaries just killing willy-nilly. Apparently, they were probably a police force or an army to protect something. Because if they were just killing just for money, then there would have been no problem with them killing these Bagaldi, these peasants, these German peasants. Been no problem. Because they would have been fighting for money. But that was not these Theban legions. They were Christians. And they said, I'm going to read you what Maurice said about what his job was to do. Maurice said that it is not becoming for Christian soldiers to kill people because they're Christians. And he would rather die, and he commanded his legion to die or not to kill the people. It wasn't their choice to die. It was the Romans' choice that they would kill them. It was Maximian, who was a part of a tetrarchy. A tetrarchy was a 4-man rulership that they had in Rome. Herod was a tetrarch. Okay, Herod was a tetrarch in Jesus' time. That's the same Herod that wanted to know where Jesus was so that he could kill him. That's the same Herod that had all the baby boys killed. So this is what we're dealing with when we're dealing with this Roman hierarchy that was in power when Jesus came into this earth to receive and to teach his people. Maurice was subject to this type of tetrarchy. So Maurice was a martyr. Why? Because he was a witness to God. His fighting against people for whatever he was a mercenary for had nothing to do with killing Christians. And he had a backbone. He dared to stand up, even though you're going to slay me, even though you're going to kill me. God did not put me in place, and he did not give me a sword to kill Christians.
Very good. So I wanted to address, we talked about it was a Germanic tribe. And if we say German, right, is that going too far into the future to say, well, see, Europe was, it's a Germanic tribe doesn't necessarily mean that was Germany at the time. Is that accurate?
It was they were Germans. Okay, so let me go back, because a lot of times when I talk, I am expounding on something that I'm assuming people understand. I need to back myself up and realize, who knows anything about Maurice? You didn't learn about this in school, so you don't even know the story about Maurice. And I didn't tell them the story. Let me back up and tell who Maurice was and where we are. So the legend of Saint Maurice, it's called a legend because some people say that it didn't really happen. And the reason they're saying perhaps that it didn't happen is because he was an Egyptian. And in this day and time, when we're talking about Egyptians, we're talking about Black people, and the word out on the streets is that Black people weren't really doing things in those old times. They weren't knights, they were not captains, but Maurice was a captain of a legion. This legion fought with the Roman army. I'm not quite sure what kind of fighting. I'm sure they were fighting over territories. But in one instance where Maurice stands up, he was called from Thebes, which is in Egypt, to go into Gaul, which is a place of Germany. This is a European land. He was called out of Thebes, Africa, to go and fight against German peasants. These German peasants were Christians. Now, Maurice himself was a Christian, and all of his men were Christians. Now, some say that he was told that he needed to bow down to the emperor of Rome before he went into battle. Some say he was commanded to pay homage to the emperor. And Maurice said, though he pledged his men's military allegiance to Rome, he held service to God higher than everything else. He said that to engage in wanton slaughter was inconceivable to Christian soldiers. He and his men refused to worship Roman deities. I need to stop right there, because a lot of times when we look at our Christian churches and we see statues in the church and we see Christian holidays, we think that we are doing Christianity. But a lot of us don't read the Bible, so we don't know that we're not doing Christianity. And sometimes you have pagan deities that we're doing homage to in the Christian church. And at this time in 286 AD, when Maurice was being caused or compelled to go into Germany, there was this fight about ideology, about whose God was God. Whose God was God. Like in the book of Daniel, when the three Hebrews were being caused to bow down to these Babylonian kings. That's the same thing that was happening with Maurice, this African Christian. And Maurice said, no, we only bow down to God. And because of that, Maximian, who was one of the tetrarchs, one of the kings of Rome, he did what we called a decimation. You may have heard of that word decimation. They were decimated. That means they were slaughtered. Decimation actually means, you see that word decim. Dec means 10. That means to kill every 10th soldier. That was a decimation. We kill every 10th soldier. And then we ask the question again, will you go kill those Germanic peasants who are Christians? Maurice said, no, those are our brethren. We're Christians and they're Christians. Note this operative word, they are brethren. They were Germans, so they were white. And these were Africans, so they were black. They weren't brethren because of their skin. They were brothers because they were Christians. Maurice said, we're not going to kill our brothers, the Christians. And so there was another decimation. Every 10th soldier of Maurice's Theban legion was killed. And the question came again, are you or are you not going to go kill those Bagaudi, those Germans, those worshipers of one God, those Christians? Maurice said no. And at that time, all of the Theban legion were killed. Now, some say it was 70 men. Some say it was 6,600 men. However many men there were, the principle stands the same. Maurice and his legion died because they upheld service to Christ and the love of the fellowship greater than anything else. The operation here is that the principle of love is greater than hate and death. There were some people who called themselves people of God or servants of God who decided that other people had to die because they did not serve God according to what these people said they should do. That is what the legend of St. Maurice is all about.
I'm not sure if you find this ironic. I think a lot of times what I see, and I'm going to bring this around, is that when someone during their life stands for something, we as people, after they die, tend to forget what it is that they stood for and find our own way to remember them. I say that because he was saying that he only bows down to the one true God, but there's a statue of St. Maurice in the Abbey that you have a picture of this statue of him. And if we think about that, and I may be going a little too deep, but a lot of times it's almost like the reversal of what he stood for. Because what do we have a statue in the church of this man when he said he bows down to no one, he only honors God? And in essence, they're honoring him with this statue in a church. And I say there's nothing wrong with honoring people, but I say this because we talked about how we have some of these pagan ideologies in the Christian church, and we're like, we don't realize that that's not Christianity. Maybe I'm not being clear, but also, I mean, I think just going into Christ, when it talks about that we shouldn't be making images of Christ, and we have all these Christ on a cross and all these things in the Christian church that are not necessarily Christian.
So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. because some people can be in one place, many people in one place, and see one thing and see it in many, many different ways. So when Jesus came to the earth, he's one man, one purpose, one God, one Lord, one baptism. And people saw him, many different people saw him in many different ways. The Jews saw him one way, not all the Jews, but the Jews who were the Pharisees, who thought that he should come to restore their place in nation because the Romans had subjugated them. They saw him one way. And the people who, Jairus' daughter, saw him another way. And Jairus saw him another way. His disciples saw him another way. Judas saw him another way. But they all saw him. I laid that foundation to say this. When we look at, let's just say, the statue of St. Maurice. When I look at this statue of St. Maurice from 286 AD, I'm glad it's somewhere. I'm glad that's somewhere. Because I was told that I came from jungles and my people came from jungles, and that there was nothing of us until we were doing nothing until somebody was kind enough to put us on slave ships and bring us to America. But this statue tells me that's not so. And if you go to Germany, you'll see this. How come you can't see this in America? What is going on? So now I'm going to leave that to go to the hieroglyphs, the Egyptian hieroglyphs. A lot of times people say, well, they're worshiping idols, but those hieroglyphs are words. And you see it as an idol because you don't speak that language or you don't read that language. Or I guess somebody might bow down to this statue, but this is a piece of history. I mean, if that's what you want to do. You got St. Peter's statue in St. Peter's Basilica where people have kissed the toe so much that they've worn the toe off, from their lips over the centuries. They somehow got in their mind that they were supposed to kiss that statue. But we understand that Peter, when he was on the earth, is the same man that denied Jesus 3 times. That's the same man that Paul said, Peter needed to be put in his place to his face because he was eating with these Gentiles before the Jews came. But when the Jews came, he wanted to act like he wasn't eating with them. So Peter was a man. If somebody creates a statue thinking they actually knew what Peter looked like, or maybe they did, I don't know if they actually knew what he looked like, but they said that was Peter, a statue of Peter, and they decide they want to kiss the foot. Well, go ahead. But that's not what the Bible says we're supposed to do. Peter had a relationship with Jesus. Peter was a man. Peter denied Jesus, but Jesus loved him. And Peter was a great minister for the gospel. So when I see statues, when I see coins, I see history. I see artifacts. I see something that gives us clues as to where we have been and where we're called to go.
Thank you for that. We are going to end with a passage from the book talking about St. Maurice. According to independent historian Michael Ohajuru, some historical authorities asserted that St. Maurice never existed and was probably not Black if he did. Yet he is commemorated throughout churches in modern Germany as a Black African dressed as a Roman soldier. That depiction originated with the renowned statue in the Cathedral of St. Catherine and St. Maurice in Magdeburg, Germany. Ahajuru wrote, "The earliest written accounts of this incident appeared nearly 150 years later, by which time the church had declared Maurice a saint for his defiance of the emperor's orders. Maurice later became the patron saint of the Holy Roman Empire, and an altar dedicated to his memory was placed in the Vatican. Some have speculated that because he and his men were from Thebes near Nubia, they were considered to be Ethiopians, which in medieval Europe was a generic description of all dark-skinned people on the African continent." So that is the statue that we were talking about. But again, go out and get this book, The Emancipated Gospel. It has so much history. Not only is it telling an overarching story, not only is it some personal accounts, but this is just chock full of history, and it's like an encyclopedia. So go out and get it. Join us again here for Sit Down with the Author. We are going to continue chapter 12, talking again about Christians that were being persecuted for their faith. Until next time, we'll see you again. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Sit Down with the Author. I have been your host, Miss Y, and we are discussing the Emancipated Gospel. Please tune in next time. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video. Until next time, the Emancipated Gospel.